Okay, my name is George Shafik. I'm the Victorian chapter chair of the Computer Science chapter. And today, this is a talk about offshoring and a competitive business strategy. Our guests are from SLASSCOM, and Jehan and Mendis will be talking about their experience with Australia and Australian companies and firms in this space. And Dr. Andre Obler and Dr. Mendis will be talking about different aspects to this topic. Before we officially continue, we need to acknowledge the traditional owners of Wurundjeri and the Barunga people of the land on which we are meeting. We pay our respects to their elders and past and present, and the Aboriginal elders of the other communities who may be here today. So on that note, I will hand it over to Mendis Asawada. Hopefully, I apologize if I mispronounce your name, guys. I really apologize. It's the cultural challenge that we have, but I'll stick to your first names. And yes, so Mendis, please introduce yourself and a bit of background, and we'll take it from there.
Sure. So hi everyone. Good evening. Pleasure to be here. I'm Mudithu Swata. I head marketing and sales for Kelsey Technologies. Kelsey is a software product engineering company. We provide dedicated teams of resources to software companies around the world to help them build up and scale their product engineering. So we've been a remote first company since COVID started. That's why you see the office behind me is fairly empty. So only a few people in office today, but looking forward to the discussion. Should I get right into the first subtopic, George?
Certainly, we've got an hour, so let's get cracking.
Sure. So I think this is really the crux of the outsourcing industry. At least that is what the perception is. I think for most people when they hear of outsourcing, that outsourcing is primarily or only driven by cost arbitrage. Is this really true? So I think it's undeniable that there is a cost arbitrage factor in outsourcing. It's undeniable that different countries in the world have different wage rates, different costs of living, and these differences invariably affect the pricing of resources in those countries. Yes, so cost arbitrage is a factor, but in this post-COVID world that we're living in today, I think it's becoming abundantly clear that the world has become a more level playing field. COVID has been a catalyst, but I think this was happening well before COVID. So people today can work far more seamlessly across borders, across time zones, and that has led to the rise of companies that essentially are talent aggregators. They go out, they find the best possible talent in a given industry in the world, and they connect them with clients in end markets who are looking to tap that talent. So what these companies solve is essentially a talent problem. So these are, to give you some examples, there's a very popular company by the name of Andela that sources. They started off sourcing the top 1% of developers from the African continent, untapped continent, and funneling them into software development roles in Silicon Valley. And then there's two other similar companies, Turing and Crossover, which are quite global and operate across the world in multiple markets. That does the same. So Kelsey at this point does this in Sri Lanka, and we are just venturing out into the rest of South Asia, and we essentially aspire to do the same. And we see ourselves not as really a cost arbitrage player. It's very much as a talent provider to markets where talent is direly short. And I believe today the primary driver of outsourcing and all efforts to set up remote teams, work with remote workers, is driven by this talent shortage rather than the cost arbitrage factor.
I agree with you. I think the attraction of cost arbitrage, reducing the costs in sourcing people resources is an attraction right at the start, if it's an attraction. But then talent needs to play a pivotal role in that strategy, because ultimately you're creating solutions, and you want very capable people to create solutions in a competitive market. But I know in the early days in Australia, outsourcing was purely about budgeting and getting a nice friendly number on a spreadsheet and reporting it at a quarterly meeting, board quarterly meeting, and saying, guess what, I've cut costs. What happens is if you continue down that path without proper processes in place in terms of the whole software development lifecycle, you found your projects failed, and a lot of them did, because they purely looked at outsourcing from a cost arbitration perspective and just reducing costs. That was very short-lived, and it didn't continue. In cases where outsourcing was based on talent and talent acquisition globally, and also market capture and acquisition rates, it was sustainable, and it continues to grow today. So all great points. Totally agree.
Great, thanks, George. And just to add a little bit there, since me and Jehan are both from Sri Lanka. So Sri Lanka itself is a fairly new player to the outsourcing industry, but we've been punching above our weight. For instance, in 2019, Sri Lanka was recognized as the outsourcing destination of the year by the Global Outsourcing Association in its award ceremony in UK. And the reason is that Sri Lanka has a high quality, highly educated talent pool, but we are definitely not the lowest cost talent pool. So we are really that sort of high value, high quality talent provider that we are talking about here. So I think Sri Lanka is a case study of where the outsourcing industry is headed in the future, which is probably more talent acquisition than cost arbitrage.
George, could I just add to that?
So yeah, please do.
So I fully endorse what Mudit shared, and what has happened post-pandemic is people are also more alive to business continuity. Philippines is very popular with Australia in terms of outsourcing and providing resources. And we've had so many inquiries in recent weeks from Philippine-based BPM providers looking at Sri Lanka as a second destination, so that they can diversify and mitigate risk. So people are much more sensitive to this whole thing of business continuity and globally spreading, diversifying risk. Sri Lanka has a very good uptime in terms of business continuity throughout the challenging past years, and it is actually a very safe destination, very strong connectivity and power infrastructure. We've had zero downtime past so many years. So that is something that companies are also looking to tap into. So we in fact call it the India +1 and the Philippines +1, where they have a center or primary center in Philippines, and they're looking at a second center in Sri Lanka. And a couple of the companies we've presented to, I'm very happy to say, have come and now in the process of setting up operations in Colombo in Sri Lanka.
Philippines is an interesting one, because my experience with the Philippines is more around call centers and basically having support people to take the calls outside our time zone, and they do a very good job of that. But I haven't seen a lot of actual software development initiatives come out of the Philippines. I've seen them as more of a support center, call center type of in that solution. I'm very curious, do you guys get any software requirements in terms of to build their call centers out and scale them out from the Philippines, or is it more as to provide help desk support and the tool sets around that and infrastructure? That's an open question.
It is, what it can add to it, it is primarily processes around business process management. So you're right, it's possibly less software and more BPM. But within BPM, they're looking at things like accounting services. Sri Lanka has a rich talent pool of accounting talent. And that is something a lot of these companies are looking to tap into. And there is a whole range of other back office services, you're right, including help desk, data entry, shipping documentation, HR outsourcing, and specific skill sets like robotic process automation. Those are skill sets that they're looking at tapping into and supplementing their core team with the talent pool in Sri Lanka.
Very interesting. Very interesting. I like your point around that the pandemic has added a new dimension to this, and its name is risk. So I do connect. That really resonates strongly with me, because that's a trend that I've noticed very recently also, where the distribution of skills and talent has to be globally across in order to maintain sustainability for the business to continually deliver solutions to their customers. So that's a new aspect of it that is as a result of the pandemic and nothing else. But yeah, it's interesting. And of course, companies who are already positioned globally and they have people globally across, are able to distribute their capability internationally across multiple time zones, are in a very strong position to keep growing. They have the competitive advantage because they took made that decision some time ago.
Absolutely.
Okay, that was great, Mendis. Do you want to add more to that, or you're comfortable we go on to this because you've got a few topics? Are you comfortable?
Yeah, exactly. I think we'll move on, George, in the interest of time.
Cool, certainly. So the next topic is access to new markets time zone. So that's you, Mendis. I'll let you kick that one off.
Sure. So this whole question of working across time zones, it's a thorny question. So this is the reason why I believe a lot of outsource engagements don't go well or become extremely cumbersome to maintain. So I think we are all familiar with the challenges when this is not executed well. There is less coordination. There is increasingly friction, increasing amount of friction between the teams on either side. And there's probably going to be a sort of implosion at some point in those projects. And I believe George has some personal experience.
Absolutely.
Unfortunately,
it never goes well. It never goes well. So 9 to 5, you want people to come in 9 to 5 or 10 to 6 or whatever that time, or work within those those hours, because people can think and operate at their best. The minute you start to put pressure on people and they're working till midnight and 1 or 2 in the morning to cover the other time zones, you can do that in a short period. And you do that in a short period when you've acquired that customer, or there's a potential customer. Once you've secured that customer, and you've got 3 or 4 or 5 years, depending on the period, you definitely want local presence there. And the thing that's often overlooked is when you have resources. For example, let's say you're entering the US market, Texas. And you get a client in Texas and they're happy. And in that transition period, unfortunately, you're gonna have a bit of a challenge to cover the resourcing and the time zone. But there will be a time when you've signed the business, the customer is happy, and you're going to continue on. You'll need people in Texas to support your products and services to cover those business hours. And the good news about that is that's a new market. You can grow that market because you've got a presence there. Now your cost arbitration is out the door. You're no longer worried about what your hourly rate or how you're leveraging your currency and exchange rates. Now you're looking at potentially growing your business as a new market. And that's what I've seen happen with companies out of Australia. They grow organically this way. There are other challenges, but those that accept the fact that they can't have their people working till late hours of the morning, expect them to function 100%, they're the ones who actually benefit from this strategy.
Yeah, and just to add a little bit there, George, exactly. I think for Australian companies, particularly looking to tap the European market, trying to mirror European hours would, as you said, throw up a whole bunch of issues with your team and team management. Whereas if you have a center in a place like Sri Lanka, where naturally there is a half a day of overlap with most markets in Europe, half a day or more, then it becomes much more easier to cover those time zones. And just to take this particular topic from another angle, I think this kind of today in this sort of extremely digital 24/7 on world that we live in, I think it's worth asking whether is there exact mirroring of time zones necessary for teams in different places to function well and work well with each other. I think our experience and my experience personally has been that this is very necessary when you're doing L1 support. So if you are level 1 support, obviously you need to be on the same time zone as the customers. You need to be very present with them. But if you're doing anything that is a step removed from that L1 level of support, particularly if you're doing, let's say, product engineering, creating new features for the product that are not going to be in front of customers for perhaps months or even more, then it really probably does not make a lot of sense to have exact mirroring between time zones. What's probably needed is good coordination and good collaboration between the teams. And that is, I don't think that's a problem that's solved by the two teams being able to talk to each other constantly. I don't think it probably might be exacerbated by the teams being able to communicate that way, because then that means that you can get over a lot of problems of bad organization by the ability of the two teams to talk to each other constantly. You may have not passed on your requirements clearly to the other side, and the other side can clarify things from you because both of you are online at the same time, and a lot of bad practices would kind of get pushed under the rug because of that practice. If everything is, if all requirements are well defined, if the teams collaborate well, yes, obviously the teams would need to make some at certain points they would need to make FaceTime, make time to sit on calls with each other and actually collaborate. But beyond that, I don't think there is absolute sort of mirroring up of time zones needed.
Yes, so the collaboration question, I think we've got further areas that we can go into great detail. The interesting so my experience with collaboration, especially with pandemic, is the tool sets around communication have absolutely improved out of mind, out of sight. Like all of a sudden, the tools that we were using in an office and using in our small teams, now that we're using them across globally, actively, they've improved significantly. And I see that not slowing down at all. I see that speeding up. So I see a lot of players in the market, like Microsoft with Teams, and even the platform that we're communicating off over is Zoom and Slack. I see these tool sets playing a pivotal role in how collaboration is managed. On top of Agile and Jira and Confluence and documenting, I see the type of collaboration that you would normally have in a traditional office environment. The technology and the technologies that allow for that, I see significant improvements. I've seen already significant improvements since 2019 when the pandemic hit, and I see that continuing at a blistering rate, because there's a huge opportunity for these huge players in this space to actually align the collaboration component to working globally a lot simpler and easy to do. But definitely, this is a big topic in its own right. Efficiencies, how effective, communicating, bridging the gaps with cultural differences. These are all big areas to where improvement is definitely needed, and it's all new. It's still new territory, and this stuff is still being trying to be tackled in the most effective way. But it's a big point. The other thing is cloud. We haven't touched on cloud. So AWS and Azure, these platforms have allowed for this to happen also in a more ubiquitous way, and that's something we should point out too. Prior to a decade ago, some of this capability would have been impossible. It would have been something like out of the Star Trek movie. But today it's doable and people are doing it, and that's another component to why this is a lot more effective today. Yeah.
Yeah, hi, George. Yeah, so just want to add some points from my point of view. So actually, we are a financial service provider. It's a SMSF, self-managed super fund administration company. So we actually had offshoring in India and Pakistan, Philippines. So based on a kind of actually a study we done previously, so we wanted to reduce the kind of overheads as well as profitability while we are maintaining a very low cost of providing SMSF administration. So in generally point of view, cost of administrating of SMS will cost around $3,000, whereas in our company we trying our best to manage it within $900. So for that reason, and just to also let you know that our company is one of the first to use autonomous data warehouse in cloud in Australia. So we actually have the systems where we have separated from the in-house staff as well as external offshoring staff. So with that systems, actually we'll be able to actually monitor and the performance of each of these people. I mean, they're actually professional accountants. So I think from my point of view, I think we good to have kind of some sort of systems where we be able to make use of to harness the benefits of offshoring within the company, a client company, as well as the offshoring company. So I think, yeah, thanks.
Cool. All right. Are you comfortable we go on to the next topic, Mendis?
Yes, yes.
Cool. So the next topic is actually, Champ, it's your IP ownership, innovation, first place market advantage.
That's right. So, actually, I did my study for my office fairly few years back. So before embarking on this offshoring business arms. So actually, in 2003, the Forrester Research has done a study with 99 companies. So actually, 64% have cited that intellectual property could be the main reason for them to go for offshoring efforts. So, and I think looking at this combination or the collaboration between the client and the offshoring company, I think it would go from the nation level, the state level, wherein Australia getting services from other countries like Sri Lanka, Philippines, or India. I think we have to, in one of these forums as well, they pointed out, I mean, we need to make sure that our sales of contracts or maybe the service level agreements to be pointed to particular laws of a country. Like say, in our case, most of these laws, also with the privacy laws, we might need to have kind of laws pointing towards Australian laws. And so that means the nation state level laws, then we have to go for the firm level access, the intellectual property access. So in the scenario where actually there are two telecom companies getting the service from one offshoring company. So, and then the company itself has to have the kind of agreements within the employees, whereas you might have to segregate the provision of services or the resources to be separated within these two different entities where they provide services. And yeah, and in recent past, actually, there have been intellectual property organizations have been the main agency for United Nations and also the World Trade Organization. And there is World Trade Organization agreement on trade-related aspects of intellectual property rights, TRIPS in 1994, is, from my understanding, from the basis of international cooperation in intellectual property rights, actually, which is mentioned in the Korea's paper on agreements and policy options. And as a result, especially the copyrights and the patent laws must follow a set of guidelines. And in these, most countries do have similar, if you say the intellectual property rights, most of the countries share kind of similar approach to this intellectual property. And in case of a research level, actually we be having the kind of research papers publishing. It's like the most the cream of the brain. I mean the technology where we actually publish our papers in another country, or maybe in my case I have published my thesis in Germany. So we have to have some kind of intellectual property agreement within these countries. We have a kind of ethics as well as a personal understanding. And so I think the real reference at the national levels of these different countries relies on how they are enforcing that, as well as how the trade secrets can be secured and kept from each other. I mean, each other competing companies. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, so I like to call you out on this. This subject is close to my heart. So I'm going to give you the way I see it. IP is about whether you're a university, a startup, or a well-established firm. You've invested a lot of money and resources into creating that IP. You've got a vision, you've got an idea, and you've taken a risk. So you're entitled, if you've come up with something new, you're entitled to have a free go at the market for a period of time. I'm not saying forever, but for a period of time to actually recoup your risk. And that's great. That drives innovation, that drives research, that drives growth. That's a healthy thing to have in a company, in a society, in a community. When someone comes along and takes it and then uses it, it's equivalent to stealing. Now we know that China have done this at scale, and we've experienced also the fact that we don't, even though there's legislation, there's no way of imposing the penalties. Now, the way I see this is, if you have trading partners and countries working for the common good, what you can do is you may not be able to completely police it, but you can constrain access to market. In other words, if between, say, the government of Sri Lanka and the government of Australia, we agree to trade, we trade together, and we agree that, you know, if there are any IP infringements, that we will not allow that product into our market, as respectful to the company that actually owns the patents. And we give them, a bit like the drug company, we give them 3 years or 5 years to say, guys, you've got 3 years of, between 3 to 5 years to grab as many customers as you like. And from that point on, then you'll have to lease your IP out to other companies, Australian companies that want access, and vice versa. Unless I've missed something, I don't hear this type of rhetoric and this type of communication between governments. What I do hear is that, you know, China, for whatever reason, for good or bad, has been in a position where its manufacturing capability is at a different scale, and as a result of that, they've been able to exploit IP. And the challenge is, you can't tell a government, here are the penalties, and we won't, you know, this is the way. It doesn't work that way. It can work if there's a collaboration saying, okay, we can see that you're copying us, and we know that it's our patent. You should not allow the company that's copying us to actually allow a customer to operate in your country, because there's a patent infringement. So there's no penalties. We just restrict them from acquiring customers. To me, and that seems to be a lot easier to impose and implement. But this area, I mean, Andre can talk to this to the nth degree. He's had hands-on experience with this. I've seen the other side of it. I've seen, we launch a product, especially in the OpenStack, and especially in Australia, and we fork out lots of money, lots of research, and it's in the OpenStack, and it's innovative, and then all of a sudden we see, you know, firms appear in other parts of the world copying us, and then it's basically they have access to more capital, and then we're at a competitive disadvantage. And we've already proven the model. We've already proven the commercialization model. We've identified a gap in the market, and and I'm sure you guys have seen similar things in Sri Lanka. And if you've been around long enough in software development, you would have seen that. I had a really nice talk with Mendis off air when we were planning this meeting, and I liked his response to this question, because if a company has IP, doesn't have access to capital, and can't grow quick enough, they're vulnerable. And Mendis pointed out that in those situations, you approach your client, and if it's got opportunity, you'll raise capital and actually become a partner in the venture. Could you elaborate on that point? Because that's a very honourable and it's a very respectable way of doing business, and that's sort of things that I like to hear from business and commerce, because that warms my heart.
Sure. More than happy to, George. Basically this when George posed this question to me, I was thinking of a client who was exactly in that position, a US client that came to us with what we thought was unique IP. They wanted to create unique IP. They didn't have the software development and the engineering resources to do it. So at that point, we had a judgment call. We could turn them away, saying, you guys, need to raise money before you can really, before we can consider working together. Or we could help them create the IP they were thinking of and become early partners in the company. So we took the second option. We actually put in some development effort into the project, partially paid out for by equity. So they had a limited budget, and whatever they could pay, they paid us upfront. But part of it was a large part of it was funded by equity, and they went on to raise a seed round, then a post-seed round. And right now they are in the process of raising Series A at a valuation of $60 million. So they have gone from being a startup to being a somewhat mature company, a fast-scaling technology company within a space of about 4 years. And we have been very much partners and real partner with skin in the game throughout that process. So I think this is a way to align the incentives in a situation like this, where where there is unique IP available, but not so much cash to pay outsourced provider upfront.
Mate, that's an awesome story. I'm hearing it for the second time, and I still get goosebumps. I love stories like that.
Great to hear, George. So I think this is definitely a model that today we find more companies are trying to follow. I think the thing is, they have this saying, right? If you ask for advice, you get. If you ask for money, you get advice. If you ask for advice, you get money. So a lot of startups will come to us and ask, are you guys willing to take up equity and develop our product in return for equity? So it's only it's the rare case that we will say yes to that type of offer. But I think sometimes those cases do work out quite well for everyone.
That's a brilliant story, mate. I'll never get tired of hearing that story, Mendis.
Great. So would love to do that. The same with perhaps some Aussie companies in future.
Absolutely, I can see that happening, mate. Absolutely. Okay, so we'll move. Champ, have you got anything to add, mate, before we move on to the next one?
Just for a moment. In the meantime, whether this session is going on, I'll try to launch this polling. Yeah, maybe you can feel it while you're listening to. Yeah.
So I'm sharing my screen, so I better move that onto a different screen.
No problem at all. It goes as a separate screen, so yeah, you can continue. No problem. Yeah.
So folks, you can respond to the poll.
Yeah.
And what I'll do is I'll go on to the next slide.
Yes, no problem. Yeah, sure.
Thank you, Chen. So this is very relevant. Conflicts of interest. Jehan? Yeah, yep. So yeah, I'd be interested in your perspective on conflicts of interest, because IP is definitely a conflict of interest, especially when you're trying to grab market share. But it's to you, mate.
Sure. No, thank you very much for that. So I represent SLASSCOM, like Mudit, which is the Industry Association for IT BPM companies, spans 350 companies, and it's one of Sri Lanka's most active chambers. My day job is in a company called Infomate, where we do business process management services. And I'm very proud to say that Australia is our biggest export market. And that is mirrored. We recently did a state of the industry report for BPM, and across the industry, Australia is emerging as the most popular export destination. And a couple of reasons for that. I think there's a very good cultural fit. We tend to connect on our shared passion for cricket and rugby. The accent is easily understandable. And it's a relationship based on trust, on openness, on clear communication. I think what is unique is about Sri Lankans tend to state things as it is rather than over-promising and under-delivering. We work Australian hours and work Australian calendar. So I think we've got a good track record. And if I look at some of my experience of sharing, working with Australian companies, as Champ said, the agreements build in IP protection. So that is the first aspect. And also we need to demonstrate that confidence to the client that their information will be protected. So it's a little different when it comes to our type of companies that are providing services. So we don't really have access to the software. We're using the client software, so that the opportunities for misuse are much less. However, we still need to demonstrate that their information will be protected. So we have taken a lot of our companies, including my own, ISO 27001 certified, which is a premier standard on information security and confidentiality. We are audited annually, and we need to demonstrate that every member of the staff, we sign non-disclosure agreements, all of them go through information security training. We have an internal audit team. We have a security forum that meets monthly. And my mind goes back to a large agri-based company from Australia. They had the head of internal audit from the board visited our office in Colombo. And he had some questions about information security. So what we did is we took one additional step where we got an external audit by a leading security consultant to audit the machines, audit the whole environment, and then share an independent assessment, which was shared with the board of that client. And that gave them a lot of comfort. We were saying that there are no high risk items. These are some elements that could be done better. And we were able to close those recommendations, and that gave them a lot of confidence. So those are some of the measures that are in place currently by ourselves as well as several Sri Lankan companies that I hope would give comfort. Now, addressing some specific challenges, for instance, now I think you had a very interesting point. What happens if you have a client and then you have a competitor in the same industry who approaches you? Now, how we would address that is we'll have completely segregated teams, completely segregated office locations, so that there is complete segregation. And where required, we would disclose that to the client. And I think that is something that the Australian clients really value, openness. And if we are transparent, I think people really value that. And it's really trust. It comes down to trust and demonstrating that trust over a period of time.
Yes, that's always a challenge when your product is so good that all of a sudden the competitor comes to you and asks for the same product, and then you feel an obligation to your existing customer who's been loyal and done the right thing by you. Do you would obviously disclose it to your existing customer, and you'll have the contractual agreements that they don't have exclusive use of the software or the service. That you have that flexibility to actually sell the software and service, even though if it's to a competitor.
Correct. So generally, we have not had that encounter with Australia specifically, but we have faced that situation within Sri Lanka, and where we can demonstrate that there will be complete segregation and there will be absolutely no disclosure. Our clients have been quite accommodating, and so far we've not had requests for exclusivity.
Cool. It's a tricky area. It's a good problem to have and a bad problem. It's a good one because you obviously you're leading the market in that segment, in that area, and it's a bad problem because then it really tests your relationship with the existing customer and the newer. Because if you push away a customer that's approaching you, that doesn't put you in a good position either.
Absolutely. Just one more part. Sri Lanka is in the final stages of enacting Data Protection Act, which is based on some of the best practices internationally, including the GDPR. And that will give customers worldwide an added measure of confidence.
Yeah, the data sovereignty question, and also with a lot of the machine learning AI innovations, that would definitely be relevant. Okay. Thank you, Jehan, for that. Do you wish to add anything, or we can move on to the next question and next?
Yes, we can.
Cool. Thank you. Addressing risk project delivery. Back to you, Mendis. This is an interesting topic.
Yeah. So I think basically on the slide, I believe I kind of summarized the different risks, the three broad risks that come up in a project. I think the first is a risk of the deliverables being quite different from what was briefed, and unfortunately, in quite a few projects, particularly in the software world, this is the issue. So I believe in the BPO world, this would be less of an issue because briefs are much more concrete and tangible. In the software world, when you brief something, it's very easy for George to tell me something and for me to visualize a picture very different from what George has in his head. So how do you kind of bridge this gap? So that's one of the big risks in the software world. I'll run through the risks first, and then I'll try to kind of suggest a few remedial steps that are possible. So the second risk is the risk of actuals differing vastly from the estimates, and this is a risk that is common to all types of projects, not just outsourced projects. This is common to very much projects done by internal in-house teams as well. So this happens all the time in the world of work. It's a general project management risk that's common to all project scenarios. And then there is a risk that is probably particularly relevant to the outsourcing situation, where there is a clear risk of misfit between the outsourcing vendor and the client company. So this, first might not be as evident. Usually when you are talking to a vendor sales team, it's their best people that they put in front of you, and later when you're working with them, you realize that, oh, actually, I've not really got the right company. The people that I actually need to work with on a day-to-day basis aren't quite the right people for me. And this realization comes a little late, and by that point you're already committed, and then it's a tough situation to get out of then, and very tough situation to remedy easily. So, okay. These are a few sort of remedial measures off the top of my head. So I think in the first scenario, how do you counter this risk of deliverables differing quite strangely from the brief? I think there's broadly two things that you can do. One is to make the deliverables more fleshed out, more tangible. And in the software world, one way to do this is, rather than George telling me I want this kind of software solution developed with this button here, this button there, and it should have this type of user journey and should achieve this type of end aim when when a user interacts with it. I think all of it would be far clearer if George could give me the screen designs for the solution and tell me this is what I need developed. Because then it's tangible, it's easily digestible, and there is less room for interpretation. So basically, anything that you can do to visualize what is needed. A picture is worth 1,000 words, definitely in this situation, and reduce room for interpretation, the better. And this, I believe, applies strongly to any outsourcing scenario. So the more concrete you can be with a partner, the higher the chances of success. And then moving on to the second risk, estimates differing from actuals. There is no easy fix for this particular risk. I think one thing you should do definitely is at estimation stage, make sure that you're estimating for the right scope of work. If the scope of work turns out to be incorrect, then obviously your estimate is not going to be right. So you should take all precautions to make sure that you are estimating for the right scope of work at the beginning of the project. But then if the actuals are going to differ, you would know that, you should ideally know that sooner rather than later. So instead of setting up very large projects, mammoth projects that take months and years to be delivered, it's always good to work in small increments. So the software world has adopted this practice where we work in sprints and sprint cycles, and the client gets a certain amount of functionality is time boxed. It's called a sprint, and the software development team will work through that amount of functionality and deliver it at the end of 2 weeks or 3 weeks. That's the typical sprint cycle. So this is a really good practice, and I feel ideally it should apply to all businesses and all industries. And it's a good way to understand whether you are at the right velocity to hit the end target. There's always interim and incremental goals that you can set up to make sure that you're building towards this end broad goal, and know that you're on track or not, versus knowing that at the end of the project when you're off by either months and in terms of budgets, perhaps by millions. Then this risk of misfit, this is really it's a question of judgment. So I think there is no easy way to there's no easy formula that I can give anyone to get around this. But I think, as in all cases where judgment is concerned, I think it's good to be commonsensical when you pick an outsourcing partner. So just like when you're recruiting folks to work for you in-house, if 10 people show up, you're not going to go for the cheapest person, most likely. And in the same way, you probably will not go for the most expensive person, but you would most likely, look at their capabilities, their background, their previous experience, what their previous employers say about them, and make a judgment on, who represents the best value for money and who represents the best chance of success, right? So I think you should make the same call about an outsourcing partner that you work with. So like we talked about right at the start of this presentation, if cost arbitrage is a driving factor in decisions, then it's very likely that you will end up working with the cheapest bidder, and that's not a good place to be. There is a famous quote by an astronaut. I can't quite believe who. I can't quite remember who had said, while I was streaking across space, I couldn't help but keep thinking that every part of this vessel, this rocket, was supplied by the lowest bidder. So I think that's not a feeling that anyone wants to have when you're dealing with anything mission critical.
And that's in the field. He's made that quote in the field, which actually has a lot of meaning.
Yeah.
When you come up with these insights while you're in the field, it's something you can take with you. My challenge has always been in this space is requirements and scope creep. In large corporations, the decision makers and the people who identify a new piece of software or service that needs to be built are often not. They don't have the full visibility in terms of the actual implementation. And then how do you tackle that? It's always a challenge, because you can inevitably undercost and underprice yourself if the requirements aren't identified clearly, and sometimes you don't have the luxury of developing a proof of concept that's billable, so that you can eliminate that risk. I'm curious how you deal with that. This is more typical of large, huge corporations, especially telecommunication companies. If you've encountered that.
Yeah. So, George, I think this is actually an excellent segue into the next slide, which is exactly about this particular point. So I think we could probably cut down a little bit of time by proceeding there. So what George raised is an excellent point. So in the absence of the ability to do a POC, a proof of concept, and eliminate ambiguity, how do you deal with scope creep? And how do you deal with ill-defined requirements? So again, I believe the software world has looked at this problem for a while, because this is a very common issue, something that's been been there since the dawn of the industry. And broadly, there is two engagement models that dominate in the industry. There's waterfall, which is where requirements are defined upfront, and therefore budgets, estimates, and costs can be matched against those requirements. And then there is agile, where things are perhaps somewhat loosely defined upfront. The end goals are clear, but how we get there is not so clear. And we figure out how we get there as we go along. So then agile basically means that there's a lot of iteration, a lot of discovery that happens along the way. And agile is essentially the school of thought that is comfortable with that ambiguity and that discovery along the way. So I think the first thing to realize is that if you are in a situation where you have set requirements very well defined, then you have the luxury of pressing your vendor for a fixed price and a fixed quote. That is possible. But if you are not, if you are in a truly agile project, as George said, where a certain amount of proof of concept work or research work needs to be done before it's clear whether the right before it's clear whether the type of deliverable that you have visualized can be delivered, then you're not going to gain anything by trying to force a fixed price and a fixed budget timeline and so forth out of your vendor. All you will do is basically, what you're trying to do is pass on the risk that you have onto your vendor, and the vendor is going to push back by giving you a hugely inflated quote that has a lot of contingency bundled into it. That's the way the vendor protects themselves. So always realize that the engagement model is a two-way tango. So if you try to pass all the risk to the other side, they will push back by imposing contingency costs and so forth on you. So I would say in the specific case that George pointed out, the best way to go is to adopt an agile approach. So then both sides understand and agree at the start of the project that, okay, we have this particular end goal that we want to get to, and this is broadly how we are going to do it. And the vendor might be able to, even though they can't give you a very pinpoint estimate, they might be able to say, okay, looking at these modules that you need to develop, probably this project would need a team of this size working for roughly this kind of timeline. So it would be a rough estimate to start off with. But what you can do is break it down and break it down again into more workable chunks and keep assessing your velocity as you go. Okay, if you are supposed to get 3 modules developed within the first 6 months in order to hit your target at the end of the year, are you on track? So that can be monitored, and that kind of provides some level of framework for tackling and managing these kind of scenarios with a certain amount of ambiguity and discovery. But really, this will boil down to the level of trust that both parties have, and whether one party is trying to play out the other in the relationship. So that's where really you really need to invest the time to find the right partner and build the right kind of relationship with them.
Yeah, it's a challenging one, because what I found is the deeper the management structure, the deeper the company hierarchy, the more likely it is that the person that's actually got the domain knowledge, or the team that's got the domain knowledge for the clearly defined requirements, is you don't get access to those people until later in the stage, and you've obviously locked in. Even if you go for a time and materials way of delivery, there's a cap. They're not going to continuously pay, that they'll pull the pin, and I've had that experience also. So it's a tricky one. I prefer agile to waterfall. Waterfall is definitely there is a place for waterfall. If you're building a system, from the ground up, and I'm just trying to think what type of domain and application. If you're building a navigation system with specific customized hardware that you had to install into trucks for a logistics company, at waterfall may be the right approach for that. If you're building microservices for a bank that's decided to go with their own digital currency, you'd be crazy not to use agile. So there are definitely good reasons for using either methodology, and they're pretty much the driving methodologies. The good thing about agile too is you have the tool sets with Jira and Confluence, and there are a whole bunch of tool sets out there that are aligned to agile, and it's around the idea of continuous delivery, continuous improvement. It's not that big bang, so you can deliver incremental value to your customers, and they can increase their revenue base, because that's ultimately, there has to be a business model behind it, and that builds up their capability to take on more development, and the process continues. It's more sustainable. So I have definitely a bias towards agile, but that's not to say that there is definitely a place for waterfall, just to use it very carefully. Yeah, it's a big topic. All these topics that we're tackling are huge topics in their own right, and we don't have the time to truly dive very deeply into them. But are you comfortable if I move to the next one, Mendis?
Yes. Yeah. Go ahead, George.
Cool. Okay, local government incentives, tax. Jehan, it's back to you, mate.
Thank you very much. The IT BPM industry is one of Sri Lanka's top 5 export revenue earners. And as such, it is an industry that the government is very bullish on, very optimistic on, and they're working very closely with the industry to support the growth of this industry. We are looking at tripling export revenue earnings over the next 3 years. There's a lot of exciting things happening in Sri Lanka with some very big entrants like HCL, Wiley's coming in. Australia's My Budget, a great case in point. So the world is beginning to get to know about the IOI brand of Sri Lanka, the island of ingenuity. And we are having so many inquiries. And in this backdrop, the government is very supportive of the industry. So Sri Lanka is zero tax for IT BPM industry. So that's I think a unique feature that has been offered to support the growth of this industry, so that companies can continue to invest in sales and promotion, and also in terms of attractive rates. There was one study by A.T. Kearney in 2019 that ranked Sri Lanka first in terms of financial attractiveness. The personal tax regime is also very low, one of the lowest in the region, and that facilitates retention of employees. The industry is working closely on some other proposals. We have the budget speech coming up on the 12th of November, and there are some other recommendations that are being considered. In terms of some of the other legislation that is supportive, they support SMEs with funding. The Export Development Board supports. I've been on a mission some years ago to Australia that was partly funded by the Export Development Board. So there are grants to support the growth of the SMEs. The government is facilitating the development of 5 technology parks in different parts of Sri Lanka. And they're expanding the connectivity, and the cost of data is one of the lowest in the world. And there were some industry reports that were released that share more details on this. The government is also supporting the expansion of capacity. If we are going to triple our top line, we need to ensure that we've got the workforce to be able to deliver all of this. And they are supporting the development, the expansion of the university system, students to procure low-cost laptops and interest-free loans. So those are some of the measures that the government has introduced to support the growth of this industry.
That's awesome news. So if a company establishes themselves, if you do a JV with an Australian company and they want to set up an office and operate out of Sri Lanka, it's zero tax. Have I understood that correctly?
That's right. That's right. Great. And in addition, if you have that scenario that you mentioned where you have a new company set up, that can be set up under the Board of Investment, where the setup cost of importing material, the initial setup is duty-free or on a concessionary duty, has concessionary duties. So those are additional advantages. And if it's a large project, which is classified as a strategic development project, then there are further set of benefits that the BOI has on offer.
That is very attractive, because setting up an office and infrastructure for a new business is a significant cost, and reducing the tax base right at the start does help a long way to actually get help that investment move along a lot quickly and reduces the risk. So I wish our government did that. Our government is pretty. They may, I don't know. But we have one of the highest tax levels of tax globally at the moment in Australia. I mean, it's understandable to some extent, but it doesn't attract. It has the opposite effect in Australia. We have companies because of that So it comes down to competitiveness. So if it's big enough of a slice of your profit, then it makes you vulnerable and not sustainable. And then you're obviously going to look at your nearest trading partners, i.e. Sri Lanka, to establish your office and possibly have a smaller footprint in Australia and a larger footprint outside of Australia. So you've got that reach and you've reduced your cost base.
Absolutely, absolutely. And we've had several Australian companies do that in recent years. My Budget, as I mentioned, CAMS is another. And we use the term extended office in Infomate. So, you know, you could have your extended office in Sri Lanka that collaborates, works your time, works Australian calendar. So some of our teams, in fact, that serve Australian clients, you know, they have the T-shirts of the brand, the same brand of the client. You know, they have, the walls are plastered, so that entire space is dedicated to the client with the client's branding. You know, they've been to Australia, they understand the culture, the business ethos, they share the same values, and we use the extended.
They're all very critical and important aspects of that. It's just, I get frustrated sometimes when I talk to different government dignitaries and I explain to them, guys, it's okay having a tax system in place, but if the revenue and the sustainability isn't there, then you've got nothing to collect tax from. That can't be a good thing. So you have to find a balance. And I think they're looking at it. There is definitely a lot of discussions around tax in Australia, but you know, globally we're not attractive at all. We're the opposite when it comes to giving companies incentives to set up shop or set up alliance partners, because that tax component is a big part of it. Have you had experience with US-based companies in this space also?
In terms of serving US clients?
Yeah, having US clients establish, you know, their offices in Sri Lanka. I'm just curious.
Yes, yes, there are. I think Wiley's is the most recent one. Accenture has an office here. There are quite a few others.
Yes, Cisco Labs. Sorry to jump
Cisco Labs, absolutely.
Interesting. Yeah, Accenture is definitely one of the biggest service providers and software houses globally. So that's
and you had Virtusa, which is a homegrown Sri Lankan company, which is now owned and traded in the US stock exchange.
Including WSS, WSO as well. Yeah, which is the financial protocol. That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, this thing's being played out right now. This is especially with the pandemic and sustainability, where governments are actually looking for services and companies to actually operate and continuously operate outside their borders to reduce that risk and introduce some sort of capacity to continue business. So this is an interesting topic. We should has Andre been able to join us, or
not? Sorry, I think it's not. Unfortunate. Maybe he's stuck somewhere else. Maybe, yeah, that's right. So yeah, might have to drop the topic for a while instead of
yeah. Jehan, do you wish to add more to that, or are you comfortable with how much we've covered? Because I'm just conscious of the time. It's now 7:43.
I've covered the key points. I mean, the key message that I would like is, Sri Lanka, do please look up the Island of Ingenuity and the SLASSCOM website, because you might find some very exciting opportunities to partner with Sri Lankan companies or even directly look at investing. Sri Lanka is open for travel. Our borders are open. We're delighted to hear Australia's borders are open as well. So it's a great holiday destination as well. And that really helps with our customers, because the chance to what someone called pleasure, mix a bit of business with pleasure. It was one of Lonely Planet's top destinations a few years ago.
I'll share this video. Just for